Hi everyone. Welcome to our second IARJ-RNA dialogue. And the topic is the pulpit and the polling booth. When does religious influence become political interference? Our moderator for the session is Prince Charles Dickson, who's a founding board member of IARJ, who's based in Nigeria and who oversees the learning and sharing of knowledge on religious reporting in sub-Saharan Africa. On the panel, we have a fabulous panel, and we have Emmanuel Ogbeche. He's a prominent Nigerian journalist, and he's a former chairman of the Nigerian Union of Journalists. And we have Jack Jenkins, a national reporter for RNS, who's based in Washington. And without further ado, I'll just hand it over to Prince. If you can just take it on.
Thank you, Priya. I'm feeling more than myself. I was looking for the person you introduced. It's good afternoon from this part of the globe, and it's my pleasure to have these two wonderful journalists join us from two different parts of the entire world, and it promises to be quite an interesting conversation. Right away, I think it's safe to say that across the globe, and permit me to be a little bit partial, across Africa, politicians are these days kneeling down in churches, politicians quote the scriptures, they borrow our pulpits. The question is not whether religion influences politics anymore. The question is, at what point does the influence become interference? And at what point is that line crossed? Who is responsible? Is it the preacher? Is it the politician? Is it the congregation? So whether we're discussing Trump in Washington or we're discussing the Nigerian experience or the African experience, the Muslim tickets or President Tinubu, who's responsible? So in this quite exciting 30 minutes, less than 30 now, my question when I look at the pulpit and the polling booth would center across practice, would center across experience. And if it's okay, I did like to start with Jack. Jack, can you hear me?
I can indeed, yes.
So let me start this way. From your reporting experience, how visible is religious influence during elections? You know, do you see that religious influence during elections? What's your American experience?
It is widely evident that religion is a major factor in U.S. elections, and it happens. We often kind of speak of it in a two-party system here in the U.S. It happens on both sides of the aisle, but it often happens differently. On the Democratic side of things, there is a significant percentage, not the majority, but a significant percentage of Democrats who are religiously unaffiliated. Now, religiously unaffiliated doesn't mean atheist or agnostic. They can also actually be religious and spiritual in various ways, but they aren't choosing a specific religious tradition, and they are often some of the least religious people in the country. However, other wings of the Democratic Party, such as Black Protestants and certain wings of particularly white mainline Protestants, are actually very religious. So an average Democratic politician, particularly one that's operating at the national level, actually has to convince some of the least and most religious people in the country to vote for them at the same time. So in practice, what you will often see is Democrats will kind of vacillate between very much speaking in certain churches, particularly Black Protestant churches, and also speaking very secular spaces. And they'll often caveat their remarks when they're talking about religion by saying, "I don't want anybody to believe necessarily what I believe." I think a line we often hear is, I support those of all faiths and no faith. So they're kind of like walking that line. Now, we do have people like James Tallarico, who's running for Senate in Texas, who is a Democrat, who, even though his campaign slogan was "Let's flip some tables," a reference to Jesus overturning the tables. And he has actually really dug deep into his religious background. He's a seminarian in a mainline Protestant denomination here in the United States, which is more moderate to liberal in terms of their political leanings. And running as a Democrat in a heavily religious state like Texas, that he has won his primary, and he is being seen as a potential victor in that state, which would be a big deal for a Democrat to win that Senate seat. On the other end of the spectrum, on the Republican side, it has been true since the 70s, really the 80s and 90s, that what was often referred to as the religious right has exerted significant influence over the Republican Party, helping guide not only the rhetoric of presidential candidates and local and state candidates, but also the policies, particularly around things such as LGBTQ rights and issues, and in particular abortion. Those issues are strongly influenced by the religious right. Now, with Trump, it's gotten a little interesting because Pentecostals and charismatic Christians have actually become very involved in political world in a way that hasn't necessarily been the case in the past. It's kind of been more what we might refer to as rank and file evangelicals that have been kind of the more prominent political actors in the conservative wing of the U.S. And more recently, there's a whole wing of very conservative, Reformed Calvinist folks that have become very active. And those people are interesting because some of them self-identify as quote unquote Christian nationalists, right? So Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth attends a church here in DC that is actually a worship service of a church that's actually based in Idaho, out west in the United States. But the pastor of that church is a man named Doug Wilson, who is self-describes as a Christian nationalist. He thinks that women shouldn't vote, or that households should vote, as opposed to individual women. He has a lot of different controversial positions, and Pete Hegseth has centered Christianity in general, and particularly his particular brand of Christianity, in his leadership of the Department of Defense. So under the Trump administration, we're actually seeing several different factions, religious factions, that don't necessarily agree with each other, because the woman who runs the White House Faith Office, Paula White, who's more of a Pentecostal charismatic Christian, who is very close with President Trump, Doug Wilson, who I mentioned earlier, actually very much vehemently disagreed with her holding that position, because he also opposes women's ordination, and was vocally out and out about that. So we actually have some warring factions within the conservative right in a way that we didn't see in the 90s and early 2000s. That seems to have emerged around Trump. And I could go for another hour on that one, but I'll just stop there to kind of give the last.
I know. If I didn't cut you there, this is one lesson, the whole class itself. But I'm going to give you a quick 60 seconds, and okay. I want you to address this question in 60 seconds. Do you think, Jack, that journalists are equipped to cover this without amplifying the bias? Do you see journalists as qualified?
I think some are, but my 60-second version is that I do think some journalists are really equipped for that. I think the problem of the winnowing of journalism in the United States in general has also reduced the number of religion reporters. I do think saliency in religion, outside of just the one that the reporter might know best, their own faith, or the one they were exposed the most to, is important, because if you don't have that saliency, you might miss certain references that faith leaders on either side of the aisle are making, and in so doing, you will miss the broader influence that religion is exerting in our religious sphere. So I do think that a lot of publications are getting better at this, and I do see some publications even hiring more religion reporters, but I have long been an advocate for there being more, because I do think it's a story that the mainstream press often misses.
Yeah, that's 60 seconds. Thank you, Jack. Ima, are you there?
Yeah, I am.
Yes, Ima, I know. The way I said that, I know, like I know my name. Religion is not neutral in Africa. There's nothing like neutrality in Africa. You can't say you don't believe in a religion. It's tough. We might have that debate around religion, spirituality, and all that. But, and the media is not innocent in shaping the narratives. Faith guides the conscience, but election will decide power ultimately. And Africa, you can't talk Africa without Nigeria. It's 10 months to the general elections. And from you being the boss, the chief of journalists in the biggest capital this side of the globe, my question would be, ground truth from Africa, the reality. What does it look like in Nigeria during the elections? Can you share a moment where religion has clearly shaped voter behavior? What's your experience like?
Well, we have to situate this back to 2003, thereabout, when President Obasanjo was still in office, when Sharia was bettered in Zamfara State. And that was responding to religious demands by the people, or perhaps let me say the ruling elite. The governor then, Sani Yarima, was merely responding using religion as an opium to get the people, to support his term in office. And since then, religion swept like a wildfire, especially in the north, where Sharia becomes a basis for electoral victory or otherwise. And since then, we've seen a situation where religion has played a very significant role. Let me quickly say that Nigeria is overly religious, sharply divided along Christianity and Islam, where Islam rules in the north, and in the south, Christianity plays a major role in determining what you get as a political office seeker. And most politicians have leveraged on religion in order to win or to demonize their opponent. Let me use Anambra State as an instance. Catholicism plays a major role in who becomes governor. It doesn't matter that they have a very large population of Anglicans and other denominations, but all the governors that have ruled Anambra State are Catholics. All the political parties seem to fit into that narrative where before they field the candidate is usually of the Catholic faith. On a larger scale, we've seen a situation where politicians make pilgrimages and Hajj, either to the mosque or to Christian centers, to get the buy-in of the clerics. In 2015, it became very pervasive, where we had where it was basically about religion. Whether it was the late Muhammadu Buhari that flew the flag for the APC, or Peter Obi that came on the platform of the Labour Party, where he was caught on tape asking his supporters or asking a senior pastor in Nigeria, an influential pastor, that this election should be characterized as a battle between Islam and Christianity. That came out. That essentially showed the influence of religion in politics. Then we had a situation where the incumbent in 2023 ran a Muslim ticket. That is President Bola Ahmed Tinubu picking his present vice Kashim Shettima, a Muslim. Nigeria has always run on the premise of if the president is a Christian, the vice is a Muslim. If the president is a Muslim, the vice is a Christian. But the APC in 2023 felt persuaded that for them to gain victory, since the president was from the south and the southern Muslims aren't considered core Muslims as it were, he needed the buy-in of the Muslim north to gain victory. So in that instance, we saw a situation where religion was the deciding factor. For the South, it was more or less that it was geopolitical without the influence of religion in it. But for the Muslim North, it was a situation where we needed to have our own man of faith to be on the ballot. So religion has continued to play a very significant role in shaping who becomes either the candidate of the party or who sustains his or her political ambition on the altar of politics. Because
So Emma, sorry, I'll take you a little bit further. I'll give you another barely 60 seconds, and I want us to name it what it is. So when a pastor or a priest or an imam tells the people who to vote for, are they guiding the people or they are putting pressure? Do you see it as moral instruction or political direction? What's your thoughts? Should there be boundaries?
Well, because religion has a very pervasive influence in our country and in our society. Clerics tend to wield much more than clerical authority, and when that boundary is crossed, it isn't about moral persuasion. It is about interference. It is about deciding for the people, irrespective of the shortcomings such a candidate might have. Only a few days back, a major church in Nigeria, let me say the Redeemed Christian Church of God, took possession of buses that were branded, with the inscription of the incumbent president, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. And that has raised serious concerns on social media and across conventional media, where people have reached or are persuaded that the RCCG is the political arm of the APC and the president in particular. The people, because they have sold themselves to religious leaders, more often than not, they tend to accept the direction. This isn't about morality. This is about simply taking advantage of your ecclesiastical authority to direct your members against their wish, against the capacity of the other parties or candidates, that are fielded, to say, look, this is the direction we want you to take. And it is very pervasive, whether in the North, and it has crept into evangelicals in the South and across the major divides of Nigerian society.
Thank you so very much. That's exhaustive. I'm beginning to imagine. Jack, are you there?
I'm here.
So let's navigate back. I'm already scratching my head. It's funny how 30 minutes can be very short. I didn't know. I mean, it reminds me of my days in broadcast. You're barely saying good afternoon and you have to say goodbye. So
absolutely.
So this is me. This is me wondering, Jack, what do you think? How should journalists report religious endorsements without legitimizing them? I mean, how do we report them without legitimizing them? What's your thoughts about that? And as a follow-up, Jack, do you think media platforms should give equal weight to religious voices in political conversations?
Oh, it's an interesting question because of the legal subtext in the United States regarding the endorsement of faith leaders and religious organizations, right? So there's a thing called the Johnson Amendment, which is part of the U.S. tax code, that on paper, if you were to be a religious group that openly endorsed a candidate, that is separate from whether or not you can be active and vocal on issues. That is fine under the tax code. But if you specifically endorse someone running for office, that is supposed to make it so that you risk your tax exempt status. Basically, like, sure, you can do that, but we're going to tax you now if you start doing that. That has been on the books for a long time. But it is incredibly rarely enforced. And even when people have done it pretty overtly and pretty publicly, it is a handful of times over the course of decades that we know of that it has been actively enforced. And in addition to that, this administration, the Trump administration, has actively tried to undo the Johnson Amendment on multiple occasions. Now, actually doing that would require Congress, but President Trump has, both in his first term and his second term, taken steps to try to limit the enforcement of it, even beyond how rarely it is already enforced. So this leads into a situation for reporters where it is not uncommon for faith leaders to endorse, but we would often kind of have to include the fact that this might be out of step with the existing tax law. Now, up until just basically a couple weeks ago, the position of the federal government that they had argued in court was that they are not going to enforce it, full stop, the Johnson Amendment. And that was thrown out by a federal judge just in the last week and a half. So we've been in flux about how even to be able to report on this. But it is, but it also religious participation in politics is so ubiquitous here in the United States. It is difficult to be able to report on it with to make sure that you help people understand what role these faith leaders are playing in American politics, while not ignoring the written, the questions about establishment. That's a part of our Constitution that prohibits the establishment of one particular religion. And usually the best way to do that is to hold those in tension, to acknowledge that these things are happening, and usually pretty quickly after there's a very explicit religious endorsement. There are certain groups in the United States who are very quick to criticize that. So it is easy to point to say, hey, the critics point out that they're raising questions whether this runs afoul of our First Amendment, Establishment Clause, et cetera. So that's usually the better way to do it. And I forget, your second question is how reporters should push, how they are they equipped to be able to do this in the coming elections? Sorry, I forgot your second question.
Yeah. What I'm saying is that should media platforms give equal weight to religious voices in political discourse? 60 seconds.
Yeah. So the very brief way of answering that is that I think in U.S. politics throughout its history, it has just been the case that religious leaders are often political actors in very real ways. And sometimes they are both. There are two people who are technically can function as pastors, one who actually is a pastor, and one of whom is credentialed to do so in the U.S. Senate. And one's a Republican and one is a Democrat. And sometimes faith leaders are literally politicians. So as a practical matter, I think reporters have to engage with that. It is not a question of whether or not, as you pointed out in the opening here, religion influences U.S. politics. It's just a reality. And so I think it's not a question of giving equal weight so much as it is being able to recognize where the weight is. And that's my big question as a religion reporter, is hoping that others in the industry can actually recognize the influence that religion is having on our politics and report on that with greater scrutiny and with just more reporting that can help expose that to the general public.
So Jack, thank you so very much. Ima, let me put you on the spot again. Can you hear me, Ima?
Yes.
So what do you think is one thing we're getting wrong about religion and elections? Is that one thing we're getting wrong? What is the one thing we must urgently get right? Because, it puts us on the balance.
Okay, first of all, responding to what Jack said, in Nigeria, we do not have such guardrails where religious organizations can be held accountable, whether in terms of taxation or in terms of government patronage. Unfortunately, in Nigeria, and I think across Africa, except perhaps in Rwanda, except in Rwanda, that we might have such guardrails, but in Nigeria, none does exist. What should we do? What are we getting wrong? I think what we're getting wrong is to give voices to religious organizations that do not place all parties, all candidates on the same pedestal, and giving them a voice for such endorsements. Because people must be scrutinized. Candidates and political party manifestos must be carefully looked at, irrespective of which religion dominates an area, who the candidate is. The media owe it as a duty to demand accountability from their clerics, to say no. Each candidate must be given the privilege of articulating their policies and their programs on an equal measure. Because a situation where you hardly find Christian clerics or candidates in the mosque, but you find Muslim candidates in churches, and we come out, if a branch, for instance, a branch of a church in Abuja endorses a candidate and a political party, the media cannot, in all fairness, ascribe it as to the entirety of that organization, especially when the headquarters of that church is not domiciled. But perhaps because the church is in the capital city and has some measure of influence, then we reach the conclusion that members of that particular congregation or sect has endorsed a party and ascribing. What we're getting wrong is not demanding accountability from these religious organizations that make such endorsements. We must ask them, what are the parameters? How did you arrive, in your decision to say that candidate A is better than candidate B? More often than not, such questions are not asked, and we allow religious organizations to run away with it, and that should stop.
Wow, I hate to say goodbye. When I look at the time, that's almost 30 minutes gone. Well, thank you so very much, Jack. Thank you so very much, Emmanuel. It's been quite an interesting 30 minutes. I look at the time, it's from Nigeria here, it's 29 minutes past 3, the hour of 3. That means we've run through 30 minutes just like a whirlwind. Well, perhaps the real question is not whether religion belongs in politics. It is actually whether politics has learned to hide inside religion. And until we answer that honestly, the pulpit and the polling booths will remain closer than we admit. Jack says there are tax laws, there are federal laws, there are checks and balances. In Africa, Ima pointed to the fact that it's not applicable there. There's a whole lot of politicking, and the dynamism itself speaks to accountability within the system. It's one learning, and we would keep learning. I want to thank you both, gentlemen, and I wish we could do this some other time and again. Priya, thank you for giving us the space. We want to thank RNA and the IARJ for this wonderful space. There'll be a little bit of editing, and then you would get a copy of this. And until then, I want to say thank you again to Jack, and thank you to Emmanuel. You've been wonderful. I don't see myself as a moderator. I've just seen myself as part of a learning experience. I will give both of you 30 seconds to say thank you, and that will be it.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. This has been a pleasure, and I've learned a lot. This has been fascinating, so thank you.
Ima.
Okay, thank you, Jack, and thank you, Priya, for this opportunity. I hope we can deepen this conversation in our next outing. Thank you very much.
Priya, over to you, and thank you so very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Prince. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Emmanuel. I think it's been a wonderful learning kind of experience, figuring out how religion plays into politics. And India too. I mean, religion is so deeply intertwined with politics in India. It plays out into every aspect of life, whether it's identity formation, mobilizing voters, vote bank politics, and it's actually a big challenge to the secular democratic structure of our country. So, but it's absolutely, you can't separate the two out. And we've seen that play over in so many kind of different movements that have happened over several decades. And I see the overlaps with other parts of the world. And it was fabulous to learn from all of you, the different experiences. And Holly, if you could just say at the last few kind of words, and then we could just end it. And thank you so much, everybody, for really joining in this conversation.
There's a saying in the US that you're not supposed to talk about religion and politics in polite company. And I just must say that this is a group of people who are really good at talking about both of those, and gladly and fully take on those topics head on, which is, I think, incredibly invaluable and important to everybody. So I am thrilled this came together. I love this partnership with RNA and IARJ, and please look forward to many more of these great dialogues. So thank you, guys.